And today we are going to be studying Harold Godwinson and his family, the Godwins, and how they managed to, in the years prior to 1066, get into a position where they were effectively next in line to become the royal family of England. So today's lesson is on the screen. Make sure you write it down. Your starter activity is a guess who task. There are three clues on the board to a historical figure who we have mentioned in previous lessons, and you need to guess who that person is. She was the only daughter of Earl Godwin of Wessex. She was married to King Edward, and she was never able to produce a son and heir. So, who is that person? Today, we are going to be describing the Godwin family and the areas that they controlled, and we're going to be assessing to what extent Harold desired the English throne by 1066. So if you look at Harold Godwinson's his choices, the things that he did prior to 1066, all of them suggest that really he had one goal, and that was to become the next King of England. So we're going to be looking at that today, and we'll find out whether or not Harold had the skills and qualities to be a good king. So write down the title, underline it, and see if you can figure out the name of this historical figure. So Earl Godwin only had one daughter, and she was the wife, or she married King Edward the Confessor, and they were never able to produce an heir. Many rumours as to why. Some people say that Edward took a vow of celibacy. Others suggest that perhaps this figure was was infertile, so unable to have children. We'll never know why, but we know that in 1066, they have that old story that you've learned in history. Edward died without an heir, so she was never able to produce a child for him. So who is that person? It is, of course, Edith. Edith was born in about 1021. To Godwin. She married Edward in about 1045, which allowed the Godwins to kind of get really close to the royal family. And as I say, she had no children. So Edith is the name of our historical figure. Okay. So today we're going to be looking at the Godwinsons. Now, the Godwinsons get their name from the founder, if you will, of the family. His name was Earl Godwin, and he had been a very important earl under the previous king, King Canute, and Harthacnut, the Vikings that ruled England prior to 1042. Godwin controlled Wessex, which was on the south of England. We've spoken about that previously. It was by far the most powerful of the earldoms. Obviously, it's where the capital is, and all the trade comes into Wessex. So Godwin was extremely wealthy, and he kind of works his way up the ranks under Canute to become by far the most powerful earl in England. So when Edward became king in 1042, he had to get Godwin on side. That was one of the reasons why he married his daughter Edith. Now, Godwin actually died in 1053. We don't know why. We think he may have had a stroke. Other rumours suggest he was poisoned, but we'll never know. But he died at Easter, 1053. And when he died, the family was then ruled by his eldest surviving son, which was called Harold. Hence why his name was Harold Godwin, son of Godwin. Godwin did actually have an older son called Svein, but he had died by this point. So it was up to Harold to take control of the family. So Harold had been Earl of East Anglia, I think, and when Godwin died, Harold became the king. No, not the king, sorry. He became the Earl of Wessex. He took his father's old title, and he assumed the title, or the position of head of his family. Now, Harold, after 1053, everything he does really is to try to get as close as possible to the crown of England. And if you remember from maybe if you studied this in year 7, you'll know that Harold does, in fact, become king. So the Godwinsons controlled quite a lot of England. We've kind of mentioned this previously. Harold, hopefully you can see this on the map. Hopefully there's not a delay here. If there is, you have the PowerPoint. You have Harold in the south of England, Wessex. Obviously, this map changes quite a lot. Earldoms expand and decrease, but roughly this is what it would have looked like. Harold in the south. In 1055, he actually appointed his younger brother Tostig as the Earl of Northumbria. The previous Earl had been called Siward, and he had died in 1055 from dysentery, which is basically very bad diarrhea and sickness, probably contracted from polluted drinking water. Tostig became the Earl of Northumbria. Now, Northumbria, if you remember from one of the first lessons, all of it is in the Danelaw. So it was mostly filled with people of Danish and Viking of descent. It was known as a very crazy area, a very lawless area. It was known as an area that was different from the rest of England. It had different laws, different customs, different language, different words. So Tostig would have stuck out like a sore thumb because he was a southerner, but he became the Earl of Northumbria. Tostig, or Northumbria, is very important because it borders Scotland. So it's effectively the Kingdom of England's northern frontier against the Scots. It's also by far the largest of the earldoms, but it's not the wealthiest. That, of course, is Wessex. The next year in 1056, Harold appointed his older brother, or his other brother, sorry, not his older brother, his other brother, Geirth, as the Earl of East Anglia, which is in the kind of southeast of England. That was actually Harold's old earldom before his dad died. When I say that Harold appointed them, I mean that Harold put pressure on the king to appoint him. Just like his father, Harold had a lot of influence over King Edward the Confessor. So that means between them, Harold, Tostig, Geirth, and Leofwin was another Godwinson who controlled some land in the southeast of England as well, quite a small earldom. But between them, the four Godwinson brothers, they controlled a lot of England. In fact, they were by far wealthier than the king. The king's annual income from the land that he controlled was about £6,000 a year. That's nothing compared to the 8,500 that the Godwins brought in. So they were a very wealthy family. And because they rule over these earldoms, it means that they have control over thousands of acres of land, thousands of thanes, lots of bishops as well. So the Godwinsons are extremely powerful in the years leading up to 1066. So when we're trying to assess whether or not Harold was kind of trying to get closer and closer to the crown during this period, you need to know what were the four main criteria to becoming King of England, or what four things would a king or a potential king need to have. The first thing is they'd have to be a good military leader. They'd have to be an effective military leader. They'd be able to fight, lead an army, defend the kingdom. They also had to show that they were pious or religious. Remember, kings had to have the support of the church. Kings were God's chosen leaders. They had to show that they were a very religious person. Thirdly, kind of leading into that, they also had to have the support of the church. The archbishops of Canterbury and York, the bishops that sat on the Witan, they had to support this person as well. And finally, they had to have support from both the north and south of England. So the southern earldoms like Wessex and East Anglia, and the northern earldoms like Northumbria. Anyone who wanted to be king had to have these four main criteria. Because remember, in Anglo-Saxon England, the crown doesn't automatically pass to the king's son. It passes to the person who is best equipped to defend the kingdom. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look to see if Earl Harold, the Earl of Wessex, does his actions prior to 1066 show that he was trying to meet these. So depending on your target will depend on what you're going to do. First of all, you're all going to read the notes that I provided for you. They should just be under the PowerPoint, about 2 pages. You're going to read them first of all, and then you're going to do certain tasks. If your target is a 3 or a 4, or below that, you're going to complete the table that will be attached to the lesson on how King Harold met each quality of kingship. So for each of the 4 areas, provide examples that shows that Earl Harold sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, not king, that show that Earl Harold met this. Okay, so what things did he do that shows that he was a good military leader? What things did he do that shows that he had the support of the church? After that, you're then going to have a little think. Compared with what you already know about King Edward, why do you think that many Thanes wanted Harold as king? So you're going to compare Harold to Edward. Have a little think. Why do you think lots of Thanes preferred Harold to someone like King Edward? And it links into this issue of military leadership. But we've already spoken about Edward in previous lessons. If your target's a 5 and a 6, you're going to do the same table, but after that, you're going to do something different. Do you believe that Harold swore to accept Duke William of Normandy to become the next King of England? If you read the notes, there was a moment where apparently Harold swore to help William become the next King of England. But lots of historians argue that that actually doesn't make any sense, because everything that Harold was doing up until this point indicates that he wanted to be king. So why would he just throw it away? So based on what you've read, do you think that that actually happened, or was it just Norman propaganda? And if your target's a 7 or 8, again, you're doing the same table, and then to what extent did Godwin and Harold manipulate the church? So this is you really extending your knowledge here. Did the Godwins manipulate the church to achieve power? So you want to read about Godwin and Harold's relationship with the people who will become the Archbishop of Canterbury and York, Stigand and Eldred, and how effectively they were manipulated by these two men, get them in positions of power, so that one day, when the King of England, when the Crown of England did come up, they could sway it in their direction. So do you think they manipulated the church? It's up to you. So you've got 2 pages of notes to read first in this task. You're probably going to want to spend a good 20 minutes on this, all right? And you want to spend a good kind of 5-7 minutes kind of reading the notes, kind of digesting them, and then the rest of the time having a go. It might even take you more time, but that's totally up to you. I'll give you some time now. Pause this video and feel free to listen to me again, or you can read the notes and have a go at the task. Pause it now, and then I'll move on and go through the answers. Best of luck. So, you should have looked at 4 areas: effective military leadership, being religious, having the support of the Witan and the church, having the support of the north and the south. And you should have found some evidence to suggest that Harold met all of this, because he did. Harold was clearly trying to be the next king, because he met all of this. He was clearly doing these things to show that he could be the next king. So effective military leadership, you should have mentioned his invasion of Wales in 1063. He and his brother Tostig dealt with that. So Harold sailed with a fleet from the south. Tostig marched with an army from the north into Wales to deal with Griffith, who was a rebel, or I suppose it depends on your view of this. To the Welsh, he was a hero, and to the English, he was a rebel. But the Welsh had been raiding on the kind of Anglo-Welsh border, and to kind of deal with that, Harold and Tostig went in 1063, and the head of that Welsh rebel, according to the English anyway, they cut the head off of him and gave it to Edward as a sign of Wales's submission. And that actually got Harold a lot of praise in England, not in Wales. It was after this that he was given the title Sub-Regulus, which means under king, and he was also given the title of Commander-in-Chief of the English. So Wales showed that Harold was an excellent military leader. You could also mention the rebellion against his brother Tostig in 1065, or was it 1064? I can never remember. The rebellion against his brother Tostig, where Harold actually sided with the rebels and exiled his own brother, because he realised that if he didn't do that, the North could, be rebellious for any future king. That actually showed not only was he a good fighter, but he was actually a good negotiator as well. Being pious, Harold, he showed his piousness by building an abbey down in Wessex. An abbey is just like a church. He did that because he was going to thank God for curing him. Apparently, as a child, he was paralyzed. He prayed to God, and then he got better. So he built an abbey down in Essex, which is in his earldom, in 1060, which would have showed that he was quite a religious person. Having the support of the church, in the Witan is very, very important. Both the archbishops of Canterbury and York basically were loyal to Harold because Harold and his father had made sure that they got their jobs. Eldred and Stigand both got their positions in the two most important people in the Church of England because of Harold and his father Godwin putting pressure on Edward. That's really important because they're both on the Witan, and it's actually the Archbishop of Canterbury that crowns the next monarch. So having both of these people on your side is so, so important. And the fact that Harold and Godwin pushed to have their friends given these positions show a clear need to stack the Witan in their favour. The Witan, of course, being the king's advisors, led by the archbishops that choose the next king. There was also lots and lots of bishops across England that owed their loyalty to the Godwins. A good example of this is Wulfstan. He was made Bishop of Worcester in 1062. Again, he was a strong supporter of the Godwins, and the Bishop of Worcester actually comes with a seat on the Witan. So again, you can see the Godwins doing this to get as much support in the organisation that picks the next king. The last one is having the support from the north and the south. In the south, Harold was a southerner, his family were, so he had a lot of support down there from thanes and bishops. Obviously the Archbishop of Canterbury is in the south. He made a lot of allies in the south by marrying the daughter of a rich landowner in the east of England, Edith the Swan Neck, as she was known. That would have bought him a lot of support, but that was an unofficial marriage because it didn't take place in the church. In 1065, he actually made allies in the north by marrying another Edith, who was the sister of the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, Edwin and Morcar. Their sister married King Harold, so that bought him allies in the north and the south. You could also say that the way that he dealt with Tostig's rebellion by siding with the northern earls and exiling his own brother shows a willingness to build relations with the north of England. Okay? So as you can see, overall, Harold clearly had the qualities to be a good king. Everything he and his father were doing prior to 1066, were about getting as close to the king, as close to the crown as possible. Okay? And that pretty much ends our lesson today. If you need to rewatch this video, please do. Reread the notes, go through it, and make sure your notes are just as detailed as mine. Okay? Tune in next lesson for some more Anglo-Saxon and Norman history. Thanks for listening.